Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast from Gestalt IT, the only show that dares to be both on topic and on location, or on-premise and on premises. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT luminaries to discuss a single concept. In this episode, we're talking about data storage. Specifically, we're talking about where your data is stored and how it's stored. Who really cares? I mean, it's just storage after all. So first, let's meet our panel.
Hello, I'm Max Mortillaro. I'm at Dark Avenger on Twitter, and my blog is at camchin.com.
Hello, I am Enrico Signoretti. I come from Italy, and my blog is juku.it.
Hi, I'm Mark Carlton. I'm from the UK. I'm on Twitter at mcarlton1983, and just switch it on and off.com.
Jeffrey Powers from geekazine.com, Twitter handle geekazine, just think magazine, put in a geek, and of course builddaylive.com for the enterprise side. And thanks for having me.
So let's talk about this. Data storage. Typically, we've all been pretty fanatical about where our data is stored. And by where, I mean not just like what country it's stored in. I mean not just what data center it's stored in. I mean not just what storage array it's stored in. I mean what disk it's stored in, what track on that disk it's stored. Everything, all the way down to the bits and the bytes. But you know, it's 2018. Who cares? Right, Enrico?
Yes, in fact, if it was 1985, I agree with you. So you wanted to even select the track where you were saving data. There is some things that we should take in account anyway, because we have laws and regulations in Europe. So if you live in Europe, somebody cares, because you could go in a very huge trouble if data is stored outside Italy, for example, even if it's encrypted, even if it's nobody can read it. Actually, you can't. Okay, so. The only person that is in charge of this is the legal representative of the company, meaning the owner or whom for it. So
okay, so you're saying that we don't care about which track or disk it's stored on, but we do care which country it's in.
Yes. So the concept of data or the concept of the single file. Okay, you don't care if it's in a single NAS or it's distributed in several file layers or whatever. Not anymore. There are tools to manage data workflows. There are tools to manage, all your infrastructure. But actually, you care about who owns the infrastructure.
I think you may want to care about where your data is, at least from a performance perspective, talking about the storage, the technical part of things. Because you may have some applications which have some requirements. You may have a tier 0 workload, and obviously you cannot run that, for example, if you're doing high-frequency trading or if you're running HPC workloads. You may not want to run everything from a NAS, for example, or from a secondary storage array.
I agree. I think one of the areas is also that we've got to start thinking about data is the customer or the business isn't actually bothered about where it's kept, but it's also then how are you collecting that data and where that data is coming from, which can start to decide where you've got to put that data. If you're doing it in remote sites and you're collecting that data from remote locations all across the globe and trying to centralize it, is it best to bring it back into a data center, or is it best to bring it into the cloud first and then bring the data back into a data center where you can start to handle it?
Yeah, but there are two levels of the problem. One is compliance, okay, and the other is the technical problem. Okay, if I look at the technical part of the problem, yes, okay, you want to know if you are in a fast tier or in a slow tier, the cost of your storage, right? But once you define these rules, okay, who cares if it's on a array A or array B? Okay, also because we are no longer talking about terabyte here, we are talking about petabytes. Even the smaller of the companies now are starting to deal with petabytes. And every time I talk with my customers, they actually told me, well, we are experiencing this, huge growth that everybody talked about for years. Now it's really happening. And we are talking about people that were storing a few hundreds of terabytes in the past.
And it's true that there's also this move. I mean, most of what you're seeing now in enterprises are all-flash arrays or even NVMEs coming in. So let's say that the performance can still be a problem, but it's getting less and less of a problem because you're moving up the stack with all-flash arrays as a kind of standard and with NVMe as the new fast tier somehow.
So taking the technical perspective then, do we care?
From a technical perspective, I care about what the data is going to sit on and how it's going to do, but it's not about the performance, it's not about the capacity side of things. It's about providing that business need and what the customer is trying to use the data for. That's where I see the caring side of things come in. I don't really care what sits underneath it. I don't think customers care so long as it delivers what they actually need at the end game. Whether it be that they're collecting in petabytes, terabytes, that side of it's
Actually, so look at what happens in any organization. So business drives the decisions from, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if they need data quickly, they just want data, access to data quickly. Okay, so they don't really care if you are using an object store or whatever. They just impose you a rule, a policy. Okay. Then if you automatically move data around, because if they don't need it anymore, it's moved to a second tier or to a third tier, who cares? Okay, not the business, because they just need their data when they need it. That's it. So everything is transparent for them. For any other person in the organization, except the sysadmin, maybe. Okay, and the infrastructure is becoming really complex for several reasons. So if you don't want to hire, a dozen of sysadmin, but you want to manage it with a couple or one, or not even a storage admin, just a general purpose sysadmin, then you need automation tools, and so you lose control on where data really is.
So let me sum up. So what I'm hearing is that there are still technical considerations in terms of location and services and so on, but those things can be specified in terms of different tiers or different classes or whatever, and that those things can be automatically applied, and that means that you don't need to worry about it. It's not that everything is awesome, it's that we can apply the right storage automatically to the data without having to worry about it personally. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's a case of you build your infrastructure and you build a platform to be able to deliver results back to your business. Once that's built, who cares where it sits and how it sits on there? So long as then you can bring in the different business drivers above that, whether that be moving into different markets that we're seeing now trending, the AI conversations, the machine learning conversations, IoT, those types of areas, that platform underneath can actually deliver results no matter where it sits. And you can bring those drivers back in. Again, it's the business that needs them.
Yeah, again, but to maybe to end a bit on the whether it matters or not, on the technical aspect, there is what you are saying and what Enrico is saying as well. It comes from the premise that all organizations are perfectly rational, that they have implemented automation, that they are using best-in-class tools to manage their storage environment, and very often in large organizations it is not really the case. So there still is, at least for a predictable short, medium-term future, the need to have people who kind of control where the data goes. Because data is not an infinite resource. If you have it on premises, you have a certain amount of data which is available to you. And
but you mean resources, not data. So, But at this point, there is another trend in the market. Okay, so we saw for several years all the virtualizer failing somehow, no? And we had a lot of examples. So these guys had a layer on top of other arrays or other systems and to virtualize all the data movement on the backend. Okay, but now this layer is implemented inside the storage system. Okay, look at NetApp with its cloud pools, they're called, or many other vendors now, they are practically telling you, look, we manage in the backend the tiers, even external tiers, even let's say cloud tiers. Okay, you don't care. You just put the rules in place, and we just manage all the data movements on the backend. So yes, you think you are dealing with a primary array, but actually primary storage, but actually in the backend, it does a lot of operation and it spread the data in many places. Okay, that you like it or not, I don't know, but actually this is what happens. Okay, and it is happening more and more often.
So technically, do we think this is a solved problem?
From the technical perspective, we are finding solution finally. I'm not sure that the problem is solved from the human perspective of things, but that's a very complicated discussion.
And again, that's kind of where I was going with it in the way of the technical side of things. We are getting there now. We're able to deliver this agnostic or hybrid solutions where data can be in the right place at the right time for the customer's needs. Getting businesses to actually adapt to that and change to that is the harder element of it. And that's where I think the human side of it comes in the way of the management tier, being able to utilize or know that and be comfortable around your data just being there and available to you. If we think about being the actual end user as such, we turn on our laptops. We had shares that our businesses will deliver to us. We just trusted that. Now coming back into where actually the people that deliver that, we've got to, and the system admins have to kind of let that little bit go, trust that was going to deliver and the technology is going to deliver, and concentrate on that data layer and that capabilities around there.
Beginning, Enrico mentioned locality of data, specifically the location of data on in different countries. We need to talk about that. One reason that I'm excited to have this group of people together is because you got 4 different countries represented here. 2.5 EU countries, and of course the United States. You know, given that, I mean, the UK Parliament has implemented GDPR and is talking about copyright restrictions and all these other things. They really care where your data is stored, huh?
Yes, and GDPR with GDPR coming in, and I know the UK we brought in GDPR, and those, no matter what happens in the future, we will adopt and we will be signed up and we will carry on with the GDPR capability, because at the end of the day it affects European citizens, and European citizens will still live within the UK, so we still have to make sure we adhere to those laws. What I'm finding is we have to start to think about how, again, when it comes to those governance side of things, the technology we use in those cases. So we could use policy-driven object stores where data is allowed to be on repositories, and we have multiple repositories owned, and it can actually be siphoned or positioned, and repositories could be held within specific states or specific locations that company resides to meet their laws. So there's technology around that, and we are taking that into I think everyone's got to take that into their planning. And one of the things that I try to work with now, especially with GDPR coming in, is that privacy by design element whenever it comes to data.
What do you mean by that?
So one of the things that GDPR comes in, and when you start to think about that, is you start with the privacy by design. You think about the types of data and the classifications of the data you're collecting, what you have within your business and where you bring it in. If you classify something as it's not personal data, it's not data that is ever going to hurt anybody, or anything that if it was to be stolen in any way, it wasn't going to be, it's risk-free data that can be stored in a different location. Anything that goes up to that personal level that's going to actually impact a person, or that's when we start to see the new classification.
Are we still thinking about logical stuff, not physical stuff? So technical, physical, logical compliance. You know, I don't want to make it complex reasoning here, but it's not important where data is physically located. If it's, you know, physically located in which storage array is physically located. you want it in your data center or you want it in your country. Okay, so you put two different kinds of rules. One is you want, even if you want to delete all the data of this guy, you want to be sure that you are deleting all the data that were anyway stored in your country. Okay, so there is, yes, we care about, data. I'm not sure we care a lot about where it's stored physically. You have a logical view of data.
Is that true? You can store data anywhere physically?
In theory, you could. There's however another aspect I was thinking about, and it is around whether so you have laws in place, regulations, whatever, which you need to comply to, but implementing these regulations has a cost. I mean, if you have to store data, for example, in a country which is, you're operating in many countries, you have to store data, for example, in a country outside of the European Union, it has its own data protection laws. It forces you to have data on the country. Even if you didn't have it before, you have to, you may have to build an infrastructure just to store the data there. So for a business, it can be an act of balance between the cost of building and operating an infrastructure and the risk or the cost of not complying with the laws and what happens if you're in infraction with the law. It all comes down, if the law says that, for example, you store data outside, we will, imagine you're a financial institution, you put data outside of your country, you'll get a first warning, then a warning with a fine, and then we'll take your license off. Well, and imagine that you have to spend $50 million to build an infrastructure. Well, you can get the risk of getting a warning and save $50 million and put it and invest into that in a couple of years later. Who knows where you're going to be 2 years later? Maybe you will sell your bank's assets. Maybe you will move somewhere else. So that's $50 million you're saving immediately. So there's this balance. There may be regulations, but some businesses may just want to ignore that.
I agree. There is businesses that will want to ignore that, and I think one of the things, I know we're delving deep into the GDPR some side of things sometimes, but it also comes down to when I've been looking at the design elements, whether you're the processor or the controller of that data. So businesses that are processing data, they might be ingesting it, but they might have a service provider, or they might be pushing it off into the cloud, and you need to make sure they're then dealing with that data accordance to the GDPR rules, and they're regulating the data in the correct way. Because if you think about some of the cloud providers, there's a chance they could be putting it into other availability zones or other data centers that sit within other countries that don't fall into the same laws. From
anyway,
service providers.
The problem to
but you are moving it on to someone else, but that business needs to then start to think about where that sits, because as the processor, it is still your responsibility to make sure they are adhering to the GDPR requirements. So right. As a business, because you're going to put your data and it's in that contract.
So even looking beyond GDPR, one of the things that kind of frightens me about this whole situation is essentially we've got politicians writing laws that aren't necessarily in accordance with logic and physical technical capabilities. It sounds great to say you should have to delete this data or on demand, or that you have to store this data in a certain location, but that may not be practical with technology as it stands. And what if they come up with another law that says something that's totally infeasible? Then what do we do? Mm-hmm.
Even GDPR, no, it's very complicated to stay compliant with GDPR. Probably most of the companies are not compliant yet. So, and I don't know. So the intention of these lawmakers was very, very good. Okay, the implementation of GDPR 1.0 is not perfect. I totally agree. Probably everybody agrees on that. And maybe they will, in a few years, they will update the law and they will make it better. Okay. I think Europe is trying, the Europe Commission is trying to make things better for European citizens. So if you read the GDPR, for example, there are a lot of things that are related to social networks. There are so many other things that are out of GDPR. They are not, and it's very difficult because if you are a company, you say, okay, I'm not Facebook, okay, so I'm not sure that is applied to me, but if I, try to stay compliant, it's very expensive, but, the fines are huge. What can I do? And for some of them, it's just easier to delete everything or to,
Or to not do business there.
or to not do business there. And so I think it's beyond the scope of this podcast talking about GDPR, but, again, the intention was good.
Well, but back to the topic. I think what I'm hearing is that you really have to care because there's laws and these laws are very strict and there are fines and so on. So as Enrico said at the beginning here, we may not care which disk or flash system or whatever, which storage array it's stored on, but we do have to care where it's stored in terms of geography. Is that right?
Yes. Location, yes.
Yeah.
There may be also the question about, talking geography aside, of whether the data is going to be stored on premises or if you're going to
cloud.
Or in the cloud. And there again, it comes down to cost. It comes down to risk. It also comes down to if the company is even in control of the data, because here we talk about if we care about data placement, but there's also the question if there is even any control over data placement. If there are any company policies which state it must go here, it must go there. If there's the question of shadow IT, right? People which are just putting data regardless of any company regulations. You just imagine some devs or a team, whatever, just gets a production database, a copy of a prod database, put it into an S3 bucket. It's not protected, and there's a guy scanning stuff with Shodan, and then after 3 or 6 months, there's a huge data leak and fines come in, and that's another question: do they deem the cloud to be safe? Is it not safe, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. And data leakage and data loss. I mean, that's the thing, right? You can have the best intentions in the world, but things can leak out. So back to the core question. I'm going to give you guys a chance to weigh in one last time. Who cares where your data is stored? Do you, Max?
I do care. In certain cases, I do care if the storage resources are limited and if there is no automation in place. I do care to make sure that data is placed in the appropriate tier. Of course, if you have automation, then it's no longer a problem. Let's say it that way. Technically, you wouldn't have to care about data placement from a technical perspective, but you may have to care on the let's say legal and compliance aspects. But it's a matter of a risk versus cost. It's a business decision. It shouldn't be an IT decision.
Okay. Enrico, do you care where your data is stored?
Technically speaking, not anymore. Because there are all these automations, of course, if you invested in your infrastructure.
Technical debt.
And yes, legally speaking, that's another matter.
Okay. Mark?
Again, from a technical side of things, no. From a usability, business, governance, performance, security point of view, yes.
And finally, Jeff, we had you in here. You're listening to these Europeans talking about the European data laws and all this kind of stuff. They're talking about storage. They're talking about storage admins and storage management. You're kind of my ringer here. You're the real person. Have they convinced you? Should you care or should you not care?
I've seen a lot of things in my time when it comes to data. I've seen data administrators take their tape backups, put it in their bags, take them home for the night, and come back the next day because that was the only way that they truly felt like they could keep the company safe. Lots of things have changed over the years, and it's a weird, wild world. And throwing GDPR is basically throwing another layer of icing onto a cake that has to deal with other things such as. Biggest example being the HIPAA laws out there, and how those two can conflict with each other when it comes to somebody's data. Putting it on a secondary cloud is kind of something that I've always was told was not the best thing. And then, of course, we went from a wired world to a wireless world. So it changed the rules, and a lot of people have accepted it. But the bottom line is, everybody should care about where their data is, no matter what system they put it on, and how it gets put throughout the cloud, throughout the whatever.
Well, I care where my data is stored. And I get the last word since I'm the host of the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast. Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe, rate, and review the show in iTunes, since that really helps our visibility. And please share this show with your friends. This podcast was brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage across the enterprise. For show notes and more, go to GestaltIT.com/podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.